All right, hello everybody and welcome. My name is Tiffany Esteban. I'm the Digital Humanities Associate at the University of Florida Libraries. I'm also the Secretary of the Florida Digital Humanities Consortium and the moderator of today's webinar, which is part of this year's FLDH webinar series, Latin American and Caribbean edition. To start things off, I'd first like to thank all of you for being here and especially our amazing speakers who I will introduce in a moment. I'd also like to thank Hélène Huet, who is the European Studies Librarian here at the University of Florida Libraries, the past chair of FLDH, and the organizer of this webinar series. So now to introduce our speakers, Sarah Tu and Melissa Jerome, who will be presenting Recetas de las Américas, a bilingual digital publishing cookbook. First, Sarah Tu. Sarah Tu is the project coordinator of the US Caribbean and Florida Digital Newspaper Project, an experienced and TEI compliant encoding for web-based digital editions. And Melissa Jerome. Melissa Jerome is the Latin American and Caribbean Collection Digital Initiatives Librarian at the University of Florida. In this role, she provides leadership in planning, developing, and managing digital and post-colonial collections. So please join me in welcoming Sarah and Melissa.
Thank you, Tiffany, and hello to everybody. To get us started, Tiffany already introduced us, so hi. Sarah and I today will tell you a little bit about our latest digital humanities project, which we've been working on for several months now, but it's up live, and we've been able to demo it in other venues, so we're excited to be able to demo it with you all today and tell you a little bit more about what it is, how to use it, and our plans for the future. So next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. So what is Recetas? Recetas de las Américas is a bilingual web project that essentially allows you to view, browse, filter, and even print your own copies of recipes that were published in a specific newspaper, Diario Las Américas. It's a paper that was published in Miami. Actually is still in publication. It began publishing in 1953, and you can still find copies of the paper primarily online. We, through a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, were able to digitize 10 years worth of this paper from 1953 to 1963. And as part of the digitization process, we review the newspapers and kind of familiarize yourself with what they contain. And this paper in particular really stood out to us that they have this, what they call la receta del día, the recipe of the day, in every issue of their paper. And so it really called to us and we wanted to do something fun with those recipes. And one of the ideas we came up with was building a website. And so that's how we got to Recetas. And we'll tell you a little bit about more about that as we move along. So why recetas? Because cooking and food are fun, right? Like who doesn't like to eat? Who doesn't like to eat good food? Food really is a way to kind of bring people together. And as we list here, like we truly believe that food really does help preserve cultural heritage, and it's a good way to kind of share that with others. Um, but then in terms of our recipe project and our digital project specifically, we wanted to be able to utilize the newspaper content that we have in a new and fun and engaging way, and really thought that recipes lended themselves nicely to being able to do that. And Sarah, we'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but she's used her awesome DH experience and skills, and has taught me a lot along the way, to help us kind of create this web portal that will allow you to be able to manipulate what you see, right, and access the recipes in a fun way. But it's a model too that can be easily adaptable for other types of collection items. So it's not, specifically strictly just for recipe content. It could be used for a variety of other materials. And so we're excited to tell you a little bit more about the methods behind how we created it.
So yeah, so Recetas is a static website that I made using Hugo, and where this webinar will discuss the general process of how that happened, how you would do that, and how you would also make it bilingual. Um, we will give you the link, but we'll do it at the end. Then we'll have maybe time to explore and ask other questions. I'll start with an overview. So the key parts of Recetas are this page that you see on the slide, which is a filter page. So this is what allows you to search recipes by any combination of filters. So, you can search for show me things with fish that I can eat for a main meal with specific ingredients. And then each page also has its own recipe page, which we'll see later. Those are the two key things that this website will give you, is recipes themselves and this filter in order to search them. Oh, and that's Spanish. This this website was made with Hugo, which is a static site generator. They're very trendy right now in DH. We used one called Hugo because it is the best one for integrated bilingual and multilingual. Actually, you can have any number of languages on your site that you want. And it's built in there. And the core of Recetas is actually just a spreadsheet that we collected originally manually by hand, pulling data from the newspapers, which were digitized, and the OCR files, they're read automatically, so it creates a nice text file for us. So we're able to just pull the text directly. And then we use it to populate a big old spreadsheet with all the fields that we need, the translations that we need. Everything goes into a spreadsheet. And then I take that spreadsheet and I use Oxygen XML editor to transform it into a variety of file types, including Markdown and HTML, which is the core of not just Hugo, but static site generation in general. I created a lot of Go templates. So these are just website templates. And Hugo, the generator, basically collates all of this disparate data into one single web page that a user can look at and enjoy. So yes, this is a summary of the sequence of how this was made. So we started with 53 newspaper recipes, all from Diario Las Américas. They are really nice to work with because, as you can see in these examples, they have beautiful headers. They're easily identifiable, both visually with our eyes as we look at the page, and also in the OCR file. The papers are in good shape, so the text is clear. The OCR is good, I would say. It's not perfect, and we'll get more into what we had to do to clean that up. But as far as historic newspapers go, this one was a really nice, tidy one in order to get a lot of the same information again and again and again that was clearly marked. So we have our 53 recipes, and we collect that data in an Excel spreadsheet. We collect metadata that involves what the paper is. We assign it a unique ID, a recipe number, the URL of the newspaper issue that it came from. And then we also pull the text content from the OCR. So we go and we take all of this recipe text. And at this point, for the version of the website you'll look at next, it is all manually done. We manually went in there and split it up and said, these are the directions, these are the ingredients, and then a list of generic ingredients for our filter page. So just eggs, sugar, tomato, onion, so that you can filter as well. And Melissa also created PDF recipe cards for each recipe, so we can users can print them in a recipe card format and put them in their recipe box and move on. Then a lot of the meat of this website is in the processing, which is done in Oxygen XML editor. This is where we transform the spreadsheet into many different formats. So one of the main formats we do is we go from the spreadsheet to a JSON file, which I have an example of it in a later slide. That's what feeds our filter page. Then we also turn it into XML. We import it and it becomes an XML file. And from that XML, we can transform it into markdown files, which contain the metadata about the recipe, the name of the paper, the ID number, the ingredients list. And we also convert it into HTML partials, which contain the actual text that you see on the screen on the left-hand part in this image. The actual ingredients with their quantities and the directions in English and in Spanish. We have to generate them twice, once in English and once in Spanish. Then they get fed through various templates for each page in order to kind of collate all of this disparate information. So the template tells you, okay, make this web page, add the nav bar, add this particular image, add this particular set of instructions, make them all look alike. And it pulls all of these different parts into one page. And that's what Hugo does. That's what a static site generator does. Okay, and that's just Spanish. Recipes are harvested from Chronicling America, which is our main grant project. All of our newspapers go into Chronicling America. It's managed by the Library of Congress. Currently, we harvest all of our recipes manually, but I'm working on not doing that because it's extremely tedious, as you can imagine. You have to go page by page. These are nice to work with because, as Melissa mentioned, they're in almost every issue and they're always on the same page and it's very clearly marked. It's on a page for quote unquote women's news with an outfit of the day as well, usually a poem of the day, advice columns, sometimes some social society news. So what's nice about it is always the same page and it's clearly marked. And even within this page, the recipes have a really nice header all the time and they are easy to find. I have to manually copy the paper metadata and the recipe content. So currently we only have one paper, so that's not so important, but we do mark it because we hope to add more in the future and be able to sort by paper. Then we copy the text from the OCR file and we crop our own manually. We take a downloaded image of the crop of just the recipe. We do have future plans to automate this and to be able to automatically search the OCR text. And then because of the nature of digitization, the OCR is mapped onto the image. So the OCR file also knows where in the image this text is. So we also should be able to automatically crop a lot of our recipes, which would also save a lot of time. The spreadsheet is currently populated by hand, but again, we are currently working on that. The ingredients and the directions from the recipe are nice because they're usually, I shouldn't say always, they're usually very clear. It's a list of instruction of ingredients and then a paragraph of basically sentence by sentence command style directions. So I split those up into their own distinct cells, and then we further split up the ingredients. We remove the quantities and make another cell that contains just this list: tomatoes, eggs, milk, butter, generic forms. Then you can translate automatically in Excel, but it goes slowly. It goes cell by cell and there's always a lag. I'll talk more about the end about what we're doing to try to speed that up. But at least it was faster than having to manually translate all of these. It did pretty well, I will say. The Excel automatic translations were not terrible, and part of that is because of the nature of this data. It's nice to work with really generic concrete nouns. They're easy to translate. The format of the directions is easy. The sentences are grammatically simple. It's mostly imperative commands. And there's not a lot of extraneous information, and there's really no poetic language. So it is nice for that. This wouldn't work for everything that you're doing, but it works really well for our recipes. We have future plans to do this more automatically, to do them in a big old bulk transformation, and possibly be able to add more translation services than the one that you get in the back end of Excel. So this is the JSON file, which is kind of a JSON is it's similar to a spreadsheet, but it's like an object, but it shows you all the same fields that are in our spreadsheet. It's important to note that everything one recipe needs is here in this one object, in one row of the spreadsheet. And that includes the translations as well. So yeah, and here you can see the ones we added, like the course and the tags are our personal opinions based on what it is. And then also the generic ingredient list that gets fed to the filter, and then the specific ingredient list with the quantities that gets fed to the HTML so that it will display on the page and you'll have the information you need.
I feel like if I can interrupt you just to say, I feel like we've talked about how seeing it in there, right? And then both seeing it in the JSON, and then when it goes live, we can talk about that a little bit more. Like once it goes live, like how we've caught those typos or how we've caught mistranslations and things like that. So it's been helpful to kind of see the data in various steps, because we catch something just about every step of the way.
Yeah, that's also one of the nice things I like about static websites is they're really easy to generate. And in that generation, you can transform this data and see it in a way that is so much more apparent to you. If you have misspelled tomato, you're going to get 2 buttons, 1 letter off, and they're going to be right next to each other. And you're immediately going to know that you need to go search this file for the word tomato and figure out where your error is. So it's also useful in that way. I always like to tell scholars and people interested in starting with digital humanities web projects, you don't always have to use this to make a finished site. You can use it to help you see all of your data together and to see your data in new ways and to catch these kinds of things. Let's see. I'll go over this briefly, but it's pretty technical. First, the Excel goes to an XML file. An XML is it's an text encoded file. We don't do anything special with our encoding, other than it just is compliant. Then we transform it using XSLT, the transformation language, into Markdown, which we have some examples of coming up, and HTML partials. So that is going to be the content on each recipe page. Yeah, here's an example of a Markdown file. So you can see the Markdown file is where your metadata goes. So the top half of this is a lot of the fields, but you'll see it's not all of the fields for each recipe. We have to make a Markdown file in English and in Spanish. So in the Markdown file, you'll only see one language. So this one is English. And you'll see the title, the description of the site, we don't actually need that, some tags, some ingredients. The site was actually built in Spanish, which is why you'll see that the names of these things are etiquetas, ingredientes. You can make that whatever you want, but since we were both bilingual and the material's in Spanish, we said, let's make it, the primary language of this site is Spanish. Then at the bottom, this line here, this read file, that tells you, Hugo, go pull this HTML file and go put it here. That is the content for this. It's a way to store different information in different files, which makes it easier to work with them and to manage them. And that's the beauty of Hugo and a static site generator, is it will just pull all that for you. This is the HTML partial for that recipe alongside the web page with it. So this is just a really short HTML partial. It's not, you'll see it's not the whole website. It doesn't include the title. It doesn't include the navigation bar, the footer. No, it's just exactly this recipe text. And this is all automatically written through my transformations. I have taken a cell in a spreadsheet that has all of those separated by semicolons, and then through the transformations, you can add any tag you want. The ones we have here are really simple, but you can add more complexity. You can add more things to your HTML tags. And then on the right, you can see what it looks like when it's served on the site. So yeah, I feel like we've gone over this a lot. Hugo collates all of these files. It uses markdown files, HTML partials, and HTML templates. The markdown files and the partials are specific to every recipe. There's 2 for every recipe, 1 in English, 1 in Spanish. And the HTML templates are generic. So it's the same template for every recipe. And it's just the content that is switching out. It uses only 3 templates, which is really nice because it's not very complex. It uses 1 for each recipe page. It uses 1 for each list page. At the end, there's a big page of all the recipes that obviously has a different template because it's a list, and a custom template for the filter page. The really nice thing about Hugo and static site generators too is it automatically indexes all of the recipes based on their metadata. So Hugo knows all the recipes that contain tomatoes and all the recipes that contain chicken. I told it that in the markdown file, but I don't have to tell it how to organize them. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for a site like this to easily be able to generate lists of just things that have chicken, combine lists, give me chicken and butter. So that's a really useful way, and it's very quick. If you're trying to make digital humanities websites like this, it's really nice because it has no back end. There's no complex database to work with. It is just one single spreadsheet. Then Hugo creates a public folder. It's just one command in the command line, and you tell Hugo to make me my site, and it makes you the public files that you need that you can just upload to whoever is serving your site. RIT loves it because once it's done, it's done. It doesn't need updates. It doesn't cost time. It doesn't cost money. It doesn't take up a lot of space. We'll talk more about those after we go. Those are the pros of this method. Because of all those things, it's really affordable. It's one of the cheapest ways to make a website because it's small and it doesn't require a lot of those things in a website that make it expensive because they increase the risk of it becoming obsolete, or it increases complexity. All of a sudden you need people who know a lot more than just basic HTML to work with it. No, this is simple and affordable. For this project, it cost our project nothing because we're here at UF. So we already have access to Oxygen. That does cost, you have to pay for that license. You can do this without Oxygen, but it is, I personally think it's worth it. It's a piece of software that really makes it really easy to run these transformations, especially if you are not a computer expert. I would say I'm a computer intermediate, but I am by no means a computer scientist or an expert programmer. So it was nice for me to have a program that did some of this automatically. We also did rely on some of the automatic imports. We automatically imported the spreadsheet as an XML and didn't have to write that transformation. It's also really adaptable because you're using templates and CSS. You can make really big changes really quickly. So you can figure out how you want to combine your content and you can quickly change it. If you say, oh, don't show me these 2 things together, I want to compare this and something else. Or if you, especially for digital editions, or things that are even more text heavy than recipes or are even more complex, you want a commentary or something, it helps you mess with your layout really easily and see how it works for all your documents really quickly. It's really scalable. Once you build it, it just keeps rolling. Once you have your templates, as long as you are putting in the same type of data, then it can just go on to infinity there, which was important for us because we started with 53 recipes, but we knew there were going to be so many more because we've got 10 years of this daily paper and each paper has a recipe. And then, as I mentioned before, it is multilingual. This handling is built directly into Hugo, which is nice. All in these files. Let me see, there's an example. Yeah, so you can see all of these file names, whether it's the PDF or the Markdown or anything. Hugo will know if I put _EN at the end of it, it knows that that's English and it needs to live in the English site, which is really helpful. If you use GitHub Pages, then you're already using a static site, even if you didn't know it. That one uses Jekyll, which is, I think it still is the most popular, the most used static site generator, but I did not choose it for this project because it's not like, it requires plugins to be multilingual. It's not hard to do it, but it is a whole new step. And then you introduce a lot of dependencies and you are counting on people to keep these working for you. And I don't like that. So I like that it's all in Hugo. Download Hugo and you don't have to get any other plugins. The cons of Hugo are there is a learning curve on the templating language. It does take some familiarity with, especially with just some basic programming principles, because it's not just HTML or CSS. Hugo has a lot of templates out there, not as many as Jekyll, but it has a lot of templates that are already made, and those are nice. But I think for digital humanities projects, you have to modify them. A lot of them are for blogs, and Hugo's also popular in the private world for just private websites, e-commerce sites. So there's a lot of templates for that genre of work and less for things like this that are a little more complex, or you kind of want more flexibility, more experimentation. There are some tutorials and example projects, but not a lot, which is part of the reason why we are spreading the word about Recetas in this way to this audience, because we want you guys to know that it's possible to do a site like this and how we did a site like this and how you could also do a site like this. The GitHub for this project is public or soon to be public, and you can always email me if you have questions. Love talking about this. Yeah, the other con I would say for new users is that there's no real interface. You know, you have to you have to install Hugo onto your computer. You have to use the command prompt a little bit. Oxygen in many ways helps that, but also Oxygen is a very complex program that has a lot of stuff that we do not need for this project or projects like this at all. So it also takes a minute to learn Oxygen, or at least to learn what to ignore in Oxygen. In the future, we would like to add more recipes from Florida, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands from all the papers in our project, and certainly a more efficient method of searching and harvesting the recipes, because that is the limiting factor on our time currently. That is the most time-consuming part of this process. We would like to go back and add geographic data and temporal data, which luckily with Hugo should be really easy because actually the date of publication is contained in the URL. So it's just a matter of extracting those, which is really nice. And then ultimately, once we get a lot of recipes, I'd love to do a data analysis on the ingredients, how they change over time. That's what I'm working on. Currently, what I'm working on is the text processing to make it semi-automated, the population of the spreadsheet. so that we can scale up ingest, because there's 53 recipes on the site now, but I have a spreadsheet that has over 200 ready, well, almost ready to go. They've got to get some text cleanup done. And we still have probably 4 years left of papers. So I expect there to be at least 500 recipes total in this project.
From just this one paper.
Yeah, from just one paper. And we have 35 titles that we have digitized. Not everyone has recipes, but that's another interesting thing. You'd be surprised at what kinds of papers do. I would be curious to see what kinds of recipes are popular in different type, not just places, but also different types of papers, or papers for different communities. So yeah, you have to scale up in order to be able to get the most out of the recipes. It's a huge collection of data. So that is what we're working on currently. And here we go. I'll
Can
pass it back to
you let
Melissa.
me share screen so
Oh,
that
yes.
I can do a quick little demo? We can take some time. Thank you for going through all of that.
I'll put the link in the chat here.
Yeah, so we'll take a few minutes just to give you an overview of how the site works, though it's pretty straightforward, we think. We'd be happy to hear feedback if anyone has feedback on using it and what you all think. But Sarah kind of mentioned this, and I failed to mention this early on, but the reason why the site is bilingual is because the paper, Diario Las Américas, that we chose was published primarily in Spanish, right? It's a Spanish language paper serving Spanish speaking audience in Miami. For a short time, they had a page that, like a one-page section that would appear in English for their English speaking audience, but that was quickly dropped during this decade that we chose to digitize. And so we wanted to make sure that the recipes and the outputs that we created based off of the recipes, were kept in the original language of the paper in Spanish. And then of course, trying to just expand access. It's a big thing of what we do with this newspaper digitization project, trying to expand access to our multiple audiences. We decided that we should also incorporate it in English, but Spanish would be the base. And so you have the homepage of the recipe page, which just tells you very briefly what the project is and how it's tied to our digital newspaper project, where all of those pages live. So you can find them all in Chronicling America, and that's hyperlinked. And then you can see some fun examples of recipes that we or others have tried. And so I will use this as a shameless plug to say, if you use our site or if you try one of our recipes, feel free to send us your photograph, and we'd be happy to feature it on our homepage. But I think we are mostly interested in knowing what you all think about how the site functions and about the recipes themselves, like what kind of things you're picking up as you test out the recipes. So we have that. We have an about the project page that tells you a little bit more about how we put it together. A much briefer version of what Sarah just went through. And as she mentioned, we do try to put things up on GitHub, so that is linked on here, but we're, continuously changing those things as Sarah makes more and more updates to make this process easier for all of us. We do, as a team, we're really into the idea of like putting things out for open access. And so we want it to be something that you all can also take and adapt for your purposes. And then the filter page, which we've kind of shown you already. And you can see that you have dietary restrictions, course, and ingredients. And then, as Sarah showed earlier, you can see the full list of recipes off on the right-hand side. If we go ahead and say we want something, let's see if I want to look for a coffee recipe. I click on coffee or café, and it pulls up the single recipe we have in the collection right now of our 53 recipes that has coffee in it. but then it works the other way around too. So if I were to click, let's say, another ingredient here, it highlights it on the ingredient page list to help further narrow. This one is maybe not the best example because this is the only coffee recipe, but um, I can go ahead and do it the other way around. Let's see if I choose sugar.
And it'll work either way. So you can like unselect coffee and it
Right.
will repopulate with this one.
So I can select sugar and then you can see, like, let's say I say, you know what, let's do sugar and milk. And it's now, readjusting the results that we're seeing. Um, so then if I am interested in this, and I think Sarah's actually made this recipe before, so she
I
can tell you
have.
all
You should
about
put
it.
the picture on the website.
You click on that and then it brings you to the recipe page. So you see you can go view it in Chronicling America, so you see how it looks directly in the paper. Um, and so you get, the full view of the newspaper layout. But we have that screenshot of the recipe clipped here on our Recetas page. You get the list of ingredients and the directions, nice and easily readable. And then, as Sarah mentioned, the PDFs that we created. So if you did want to print out your own recipe card to have in your kitchen, it has the ingredients and the directions, and then a QR code that if you were to scan would take you back to the Chronicling America page, the page where the newspaper is found in the newspaper database, Chronicling America. So that takes you back there. The other thing you can do, as Sarah was mentioning before, so aside from just having the filters, is that you can also view a straight list of, oh, I guess before I move on, you can filter by text searching, right? So if I wanted to do, I'll just do azúcar again because that was something that we did. You see it automatically filter down to recipes that have that in there. So you can do a keyword search, um, and then also filter that way. So that's another option. Um, and then Sarah was mentioning before, you can also just view a straight list of all of the recipes that we have. And this is in alphabetical order. So you can kind of click through this way and just kind of browse all the different recipes that we have. And then the same thing here, you can do a text search and it filters down, um, you know, by what you're searching for. And then, as we mentioned before, the site is bilingual. So if you wanted to toggle between languages, you could. And we have them set up here as just simple buttons on the top navigation bar, so that you could filter between or toggle between the two languages. And they look the same with the exception of obviously the translations, but they function in the same manner. So you can come in and do the same thing. Um, Filter by ingredient, and click on something and continue to filter recipes. Yeah, and so we're excited, as Sarah was talking about our future plans, excited to be able to introduce new tags. Um, I'm most excited about being able to introduce the geographic tag because it'll be fun once we start to implement additional newspapers from Florida, but papers as well from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and seeing, being able to trace how recipes are differing or how ingredients are being used in different ways in multiple places. So that'll be really exciting. Um, yeah, and so thank you for sharing the link in the chat. I think that's all we have for today. I don't know if anybody has questions for us or if anybody wants to share on ways they think they can use something like this.
I'd like to say thank you again to Sarah and Melissa for their amazing presentation. Now I'm going to stop the recording and we will move into our Q&A session.